Counselor, you're on.
Okay, great. I would like to call to order the Finance Committee meeting of November 30th, 2020 at 5:02 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Sure. That'll be Counselor Romana Beta,
Here.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Present.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
I'm here.
Counselor Seg Lindell,
Here.
Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez. Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Okay, we have a quorum. The next item is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Okay, any changes from the committee? Can I have a motion regarding the agenda?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Seg Lindell,
Yes.
and Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item is approval of the consent agenda. Items to be pulled off the consent agenda. Counselor Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to pull H and I for just two quick questions.
Okay. H and I. Okay, other items. Councilwoman Villarreal.
I'd like to pull item J for discussion.
Okay. Other items? Is there a motion regarding the consent agenda as amended?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Okay, and I have a roll call, please.
Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Seg Lindell,
Yes.
and Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez. Thank you.
Okay, then let's move on to approval of the minutes. The first being the regular Finance Committee meeting of November 2nd, 2020. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Anything from the committee? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Seg Lindell,
Yes.
and Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Okay, those have been approved. The Special Finance Committee meeting minutes for November 16, 2020. Are there changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chair.
Anything from the committee?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Councilwoman Villarreal.
I just had a question. The discussion for item 7, there was a motion to move resolution with no recommendation. And it said for, none, against, none, and then abstain, all of us. How was that supposed to be recorded? If we move it forward with no recommendation, we vote in the for, right? Not
Yes, I believe so.
So,
Yes, because the motion was there was a motion and the motion was approved.
right.
Right.
So that's the one adjustment we need to make. I just want to make sure I didn't read that incorrectly.
Okay, so Ms. McCoy, can we make that change to the minutes?
Mr. Chair, councilors, yes, I will have our staff confirm with the city attorney and city clerk and then make that appropriate change.
Okay, Councilwoman Villarreal.
That's all I have. I move to approve as amended with those changes.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, that's Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
and Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that brings us to presentation. Presentation 6A is our first quarter financial update. Ms. McCoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today we have joining us Alexis Lotero, Bradley Flitch, and Andy Hopkins from our team to review the first quarter financial report with you. We're going to, as I mentioned before, we're going to give a brief update on the financial report. The entire report has been emailed out to all counselors and will be posted on our website as well. This is extremely important, of course, for us to do these quarterly reviews, especially in a year where our revenues are so uncertain. So we really look forward to not only the written monthly GRT updates that we have been providing to the committee, but also these quarterly reports to be able to review how our major revenue sources are coming in, as well as how our major expense categories are looking. I think initially in this first presentation after the first quarter, you will notice comments from our staff and comments in the report that we are still very early on in our fiscal year to be making any significant deviations from the budget that was approved by this council in July. So as this was being put together, as you know, in the last few weeks, we have gone into a further shutdown period than we were in from July, August, and September. So the revenue results that we expect in the months of November and potentially December, we will be seeing a very different picture from what we saw from July through September. So we just want to give that word of caution as we are going into and reviewing these first quarter results with you. We are still taking a cautionary approach, a month by month approach to managing our revenue and our expenses. So that being said, I will turn it over to Andy. I will share the presentation and turn it over to Andy Hopkins for initial remarks on revenues and expenditures through all of our funds, as well as in our general fund. So Andy, as I pull up the report, do you want to get started?
Sure. Thank you, Mary. And thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. The first quarter report, of course, looks a bit different than previous reports because the budget looks very different this year. As you all know, with the pandemic situation, as expected, the city's revenues are much lower in many cases than we have seen in previous years. This particularly affects the gross receipts tax, which forms the largest single revenue share in the budget, and particularly in the case of the general fund, a very significant share of overall expenses or overall revenues, excuse me. And because of this, the budget office and the finance department worked with all city departments extensively over this year to the budget process this year in order to reduce their budget outlays. We took several steps, including holding the line on capital purchases, holding vacancies open and unfunded, and various other steps to make sure that we would meet our reduced revenue picture. But of course, now with the pandemic seeming to surge once again, it's more important than ever that we hold to these targets, and because the local and the regional economy, of course, has been severely impacted by the pandemic. With that said, as Mary mentioned before, we have not seen any significant deviations from our budget targets, either in all funds picture or the general fund picture. Just to note to you, as usual, the operating budget for all funds includes all non-CIP funds, because CIP funds tend to behave a bit differently by their multi-year nature and the fact that we tend to bond them in one year and spend them in subsequent years, they kind of would skew the picture if we included them here. So this is focused more on operating funds. But again, as you can see there, we are not currently projecting any variance from the budget at this point. And such is the case also for the general fund. But as Mary noted, the fiscal year is still quite young, so there is still plenty of time for positive or negative trends to develop that would cause us to refine these projections later on. So we're definitely keeping an eye on it, and we'll continue to work with departments on making sure that we're still delivering a good level of service for the community while meeting this unique financial challenge that we're meeting right now. And that will conclude my portion of the presentation, and I will stand for questions, or if not, I will turn it over to Brad.
Okay, are there questions from the committee on what Andy presented? Okay, Brad, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So the first thing we're going to talk about is I want to make a distinction. Gross receipts are sales to the companies that pay taxes, and gross receipt tax is what the city receives in payments from the state. And so when I talk about gross receipts, we're looking at the first chart. And in this case, we're comparing 2019 and 2020, not fiscal years, but actual years, and by month. So you can see how the businesses are doing. This is really about how is the economy of Santa Fe doing. So I'd like to highlight, the most important number was just occurred in September, and we actually had year-over-year growth in the retail sector. Why is that? Taxable retail sector. Why is that important? It's 31% of all gross receipts. It is by far by twice as large any other industry segment. So retail sales is really important. The other thing you would want to point out is that, professional, scientific, and technology has been growing for the year, and utilities has been a steady grower of like 7.4% for the year. So those are all highlights. Then if we scroll down, the next important thing is the gross receipt tax, and that's what's distributed to the city. What we're seeing here is the month that it was earned. And so when you look at July, that was actually paid in September, but it was earned in July based on those receipts. You can see a good consistency year over year relative to the budget. FY20 came in better than expected, but with an adjustment, it came in almost exactly on budget. And since our budget this year was based on FY20's budget, we're in great shape. That we're actually coming in right about expected, down 20%. So this shows that we're down 23%, but it's largely because of the distribution in July 2019. Moving on, next we have gross receipts is the single largest, most material. The rest of the information is a summary of the monthly GRT report that you're provided. This is property tax. Everybody's just now starting to get their property tax bills. It doesn't get really interesting until the next few months when people pay. Otherwise, there's really not much to say about property tax. And then lastly, I'd like to cover lodger's tax. Lodger's tax, we've got 3 months of good data. It shows that we're coming in about a third of where we were in previous months. I just want to, the budget was built based on quarters: first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. So the first 2 quarters, we expected only 25% of revenue of the FY. Our budget was, down 75% for the first 2 quarters. So this is actually a little better than expected, but I must caution you, given the shutdown and restrictions of this new and getting a more date certain on the virus, we don't know exactly what this is, who's pay, or what demographic is paying this lodger's tax. But anyway, the tourism is up in the air. So, and that's all I have for taxes. And if you have any questions on taxes, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Okay, questions from the committee? Councilwoman Vihil Coppler, you have joined us. Did you have any questions?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Okay. Okay,
Mr.
thank
Chair,
you.
Then I'd like to just finish with the investments. Basically, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates to 0 in March 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic, and interest rates have really gone nowhere other than there. They have been falling consistently. It's as securities roll off, we put them into the money market fund. Our strategy right now is there is really no reason to take any risk. And so we just let the money accumulate in the money market funds, be risk adverse. Our best month in 2019 was $700,000 a month in interest income. We're now at $90,000 a month and falling. Just to give a magnitude. So interest is not very much per month anymore. And that's all I have.
Okay, any questions on this item? Okay, Ms. McCoy, do you want to give us a summary?
I think it's very early in the fiscal year after 3 months of results. We are right on pace with the levels that were budgeted by the governing body in July. We will continue to provide monthly updates on GRT. As Brad indicated, he gave you some highlights on our economy. Over the summer, construction was strong. We're seeing a bounce back in retail for the month of September. We'll try to continue to give you these highlights for our local economy so we can understand how we proceed. But at this point, at least especially for the general fund, it's too early to make any serious budget adjustments. As we can see from 1 week to the next, we can go into a shutdown, go into the red zone, or go to the yellow zone, or go back to the red zone. So we're still continuing to have a very cautious approach this early in the fiscal year with the uncertainty that we continue to face with how the pandemic is impacting our local economy.
Okay, and so you sent this to our inbox and you're going to send it to the rest of the counselors, I assume, right?
Yes, all the counselors do have this in their inbox.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We will be posting it online as well for the public to view.
Okay, great. All right, then that brings us to our action items, the items that were pulled off consent. The first being item H, which is consideration of bill, which is an ordinance amending section 14-8. 0.14C SFCC 1987 to add a reference to the impact fee service area. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just had one quick question. I was looking at the list of projects that were included And we had on 2 different land use cases had spoken about the Rufina Lopez Lane intersection and utilizing impact fees for improvements there. And I did not see that listed anywhere. So I wanted to get some information on whether that will still be able to utilize impact fees and why it's not on the list right now.
Okay, Mr. Isaacson, did you have an answer?
I would actually like to defer to Carlos Gamora. He's been working on this project, doing a great job, and is most up to speed with both the eligible projects list and where things stand.
Okay, Mr. Gamora, did you have an answer to the question regarding the intersection of Rufina?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair and Councilor Cassett Sanchez. So right now, Rufina and Lopez Lane is on the project's list. The proposal is for it to be on there as an eligible project for up to $1.8 million. If we look at, I don't actually have the page in front of me. So the bill item only has the 2014 IFCIP. The earlier item, actually the resolution, is what is approving the IFCIP, and that resolution does have it. If you look at the IFCIP, it's at the very end of that. It's page 73 of the proposed IFCIP. I did also want to comment, does that answer your question? Have you found it on there?
Yeah, just scrolling through PrimeGov. Go ahead and keep talking while I'm scrolling.
Absolutely. I did also want to bring up, Councilor Villarreal did ask for the same presentation I gave to Public Works and Utilities Committee. And so I can also go through that as well. That covers both the resolution approving the IFCIP, which we're talking about right now, and also the bill that would be changing and assessing impact fees. So if any councilors would like me to go into that presentation, I can. We certainly don't have to if you feel like your questions have been satisfied.
Okay, are there any other questions from the committee?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Councilwoman Villarreal.
can Mr. Gamora send us that? Unless he sent it, I didn't find it, but did you send the presentation to us via email?
The Councilor Villarreal, the presentation hasn't been sent through email. I believe it is in the minutes for the Public Works and Utilities Committee. I will say that the presentation is mainly some pictures of tables and doesn't have a lot of text explaining what that is. But if the governing body memo is somewhat clear, I think that is the best and most concise summary of what the resolution and the ordinance are.
That sounds good. Can you still send that to us anyway?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, what is the pleasure of the committee?
Move to approve.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
and Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that item passes. That our next item then is I, which is a request for approval to enter into a grant agreement with the New Mexico Environment Department to provide reimbursable funding for electric vehicle charging stations at city's public parking garages. The grant funds are reimbursable in the total amount of $26,303. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just had a question about the placement of these charging stations and that they are all located downtown. My understanding is that these are for public use. Is that correct? Not just for city?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, that's correct. They are for public use and for our fleet vehicles.
Okay, so I was just curious about the placement of them all being downtown and not having equal access on districts, well, the south side of town, District 3, District 4, to charging stations. And if you could give me some more information on why it was decided to put all of these at these locations?
Certainly. So we submitted an application to the Environment Department for one dual port charging station, meaning it serves 2 parking spaces for each of our public parking garages and public parking lots. So that was decided just because that's, at this point, basic infrastructure we need at those facilities. It's worth noting that a part of recommendations that are coming before you in January from the Public Works Department, from a follow-up from our investment grade audit at our facilities for energy efficiency and water saving improvements, will include a charging station at the Southside Library, as well as the police station. But for this project, we just identified the public parking spaces as the best locations to get access to this grant funding. But it is in no way, excuse me, in no way the completion of our plans to install electric vehicle charging stations.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to hear that there will be a proposal for Southside Library. Has the GCCC parking lot also been considered?
So we're also, some funding that we're using to cover our share for this grant is capital outlay funding coming from the New Mexico legislature. And we'll be able to use that to install charging stations for electric vehicles for our fleet. And I've been talking with John Munoz about a charging station for one of his vehicles that would be parked at GCCC that could add a charging station to the public facing side of that facility. If that works out in terms of where the electrical panel is and a site assessment that we haven't performed yet. There's currently a charging station there serving 2 parking spaces. We may be able to expand that.
Okay, wonderful. That's good to know. Good information. Thank you so much. I just want to make sure that we are considering equitable access to charging stations throughout the city. So I do appreciate you letting us know what's coming down the pike as well. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Problem.
Okay, anything else from the committee? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
Yes.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
and Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that item's been approved. We are on item J, which is consideration of a resolution establishing City of Santa Fe legislative priorities for consideration by the New Mexico State Legislature during the 55th legislature, the first session of 2021. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just had a couple of questions. I think overall, it's really thorough. There's a lot of good pieces to that. It seems a little late we were doing this. We usually get this ahead of time to go back and forth about what should be included. And I think it actually hits the highlights of what we want to consider and what we want known to be our priorities for the legislature. And I was just curious, it said that in Public Works, it was passed without recommendation. Can you explain that piece first for me, why it didn't get a recommendation? And I don't know who's on Public Works.
Ms. Willer.
Thank you, Chairman, Councilor Villarreal. I don't remember that happening. So I don't know if Jesse does. He's on the call too.
Councilwoman Vihil Coppler's on Public Works. Councilwoman Vihil Coppler, can you recall what we did at Public Works?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can remember that I had questions that weren't answered, and I was wanting to hear the answers to the questions prior to voting. And I'm not sure that any other counselors had questions. I can't recall, but I can tell you what my questions were. And that is on the resolution on page 5, line 10. It refers to endorsing any legislation that establishes an occupancy surtax. And I wanted to know what that meant. An occupancy surtax on what? And I did send my questions in to Jesse, but I don't believe I heard back. So I don't know if there's an answer to that.
So I have similar questions too. Mr. Chair, and I'm wondering though, if you could remember, Councilwoman, if why it didn't get a vote or it moved forward without recommendation? Is that because everybody had questions or?
Well, I guess, you know, there was another question about supporting a tax on unoccupied homes, or I mean, removing the 3% tax cap on unoccupied homes, which has not in a long time that I can even recall when we discussed that as a council, you know, what we thought about that. So that was the other item that we had some misgivings about, and whether or not we were ever going to have that on any agenda. So there was, I think, some doubt because we didn't have answers, but I don't know any other questions. I can't recall any other questions that anyone else had. Not to say there weren't any, but at least those were too big, especially, well, the second home property tax and the occupancy tax, which could mean a whole lot of different things. So I don't think the committee felt like we could move forward. I think Councilor Garcia is online too, and maybe he has other remembrances of questions that were at the meeting.
Okay, Mr. Guillen, do you recall what the Public Works Department ultimately decided with this item?
The Public Works and Utilities Committee moved this forward with no recommendation because they wanted answers to Councilor Vihil-Coppler's questions before they took a motion on it, up or down. So in response to those questions, the occupancy tax is the lodger's tax. And in 2019, Senator Worth proposed an amendment that would dedicate some of the funds to affordable housing. So the language in the legislative priorities is, I believe, related to that bill that died in committee. The 3%, the elimination of the 3% cap on tax increases for non-owner occupied residences is something that Representative McQueen has proposed at the legislature. And it has been in our priorities list for, I know it was definitely last year. I believe it was the year before. So both of these were in last year, if not the year before as well.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Villarreal, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for that clarity, Jesse, just to understand why it didn't pass. I guess I also had that same question about occupancy tax, and thanks for explaining that piece. I'm just wondering, what's the process of potentially considering other ones? And I did go through the municipal league legislative priorities, and I think there were some good ones on that. There were some related to public safety. I wasn't quite sure or in agreement with how they worded their resolutions. So I'm just wondering, what's the best way to do this? Because I'm just curious about a few things. One, if we should state anything related to funding support or funding for eviction support that might be and actually has been considered at the state level. I think that's something that's important to add to the list. And then I was curious if we needed to state specifically, as it relates to public safety, our stance on banning no-knock warrants and having the state consider that piece. That wasn't listed specifically on the municipal league's legislative priorities. They were very general and vague about what they wanted to do. They talked about creating a police reform committee, which I don't think is a bad idea. I just wanted to see if there were certain things that we have already made statements on as it relates to public safety to add that to this list of priorities. And then I know, well, I had another question, but I guess I'll leave it. I just wanted to see what your thoughts are on that piece, like making amendments now, or the next step, I think, is it goes on to council, right, next week?
Quality of life on the 2nd, according to the agenda.
Okay.
And council on the 9th. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilor. If you would like to propose amendments, and I'm sorry, I can't remember if you're on quality of life or not. But if you are, then you could maybe draft up more specific language and propose them then. And I can work with you on that. And so we can include some of the items you mentioned, including NORNOC warrants as specific, therefore be it resolved clauses. In regards to the municipal league resolutions, in previous years, we haven't attached all of them as items that we support. We sort of picked and chosen. This year we did just adopt them as a slate, but that doesn't mean that we can't take some of them off if they're ones that the governing body determines that you don't agree with.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe more of just a statement in the resolution saying that, I forgot, there's somewhere it states, and I'll look for it again, about endorsing legislation. No, wait. Something related to supporting the municipal leagues legislative priorities, but maybe we just make it more general, like some of them, or I don't know. I need to think about that language. So yeah, I think that would be important, not to just generally state that we support every single thing that they put on their list.
Mr. Chair, Councilor, in years past, so Exhibit A is the municipal league resolutions.
Yep.
What we've done in the past is just on Exhibit A, it lists the ones that we support. Right now, Exhibit A is just all of the municipal league resolutions. So in place of that, if a majority decide to do that, we can pull out the ones that we don't want to support and then just list those, switch up Exhibit A and just list the ones that we want to support there in place of the existing Exhibit A.
Okay, so maybe it's that further resolved section that just needs a little bit of tweaking about the city lobbyists to work with the New Mexico Municipal League in support of their 2021 legislative priorities, where the city would benefit from the passage of such an initiative. Maybe we just need to tweak that a little bit. So I'll look at that. I did have a question on what we were referring to on page 5 of the resolution. It's a further resolved piece on line 16 about the governing body supports and endorses any legislation that would increase funding for the New Mexico Tourism Department for use in advertising, a statewide co-op grant program, a personnel expansion that restores the reduction in services at the department between 2010 and 2018. I don't understand that. Is there someone that could elaborate on what that means?
Mr. Chair, Councilor Randy Aranda will be the best one to respond to that, but my understanding is that there was a pretty much a reduction in staff statewide, really, during the Martinez administration, including at the tourism department. So the idea is that we support funding for the tourism department back to where it was or more under the Richardson administration to promote tourism in the state, including in Santa Fe.
Okay, that's helpful. I wasn't sure the time period, but now that makes sense. That's all the questions I have now. I'll make some amendments for language adjustments for Wednesday's meeting. That's all. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
great. Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering, Jesse, if you might be able to point me in the direction where I can get more information on the Municipal League's resolution concerning police body cameras and public record implications.
Let me look at, is it a, sorry, I don't have it up in front of me. Is it a specific?
Exhibit A, page 11.
If it's a, is it a specific resolution? Sorry.
Yeah, 2020-34.
Okay. Mr. Chair, Councilor, what information, additional information are you looking for?
I was just wondering if there's some more background info I could read on where the municipal league is coming from with this piece. It just kind of mentions sensitive situations. It's not very clear. So I would just be interested in digging into the background on this resolution, if we have that information, or if I just need to go digging on my own.
Counselor, Mr. Chair,
Yes, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
Counselor Cassette Sanchez, since I sit on the Municipal League Board, be happy to connect you to somebody who can provide information on that.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much, Counselor.
Mr. Chair, can I also get information on that as well?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else, Councilwoman Cassette Sanchez? Anything else from the committee? Then what is the pleasure of the committee?
Move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call, please?
Counselor Romana Beta,
Yes.
Counselor Renee Villarreal,
I'm going to abstain until further discussion at the next committee. Thanks.
Counselor Carol Romero Worth,
Yes.
Counselor Signe Lindell,
Yes.
and Counselor Jamie Cassett Sanchez.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes the items that were withdrawn from the consent calendar. We are on to item 8, which is matters from staff. Ms.
Mr.
McCoy.
Chair, counselors, I'm happy to give you an update on our CARES Act grant funding from the state. As you are aware, we were awarded $17.5 million. Of the $17.5 million, the city has already encumbered $12 million. That's a little bit under 70% that has been encumbered. Of that $12 million, we've already expended out the door, made payments for $6.5 million of that. So that's a little under 40% of that $17.5 million. Yeah, for a little under 40%. So what we have to look forward to over the next 4 weeks is continuing to expend what has been encumbered. If you recall, there's about $5 million that has been approved for direct community assistance. That direct community assistance will go to citizens of the city of Santa Fe in the form of rental assistance, utility payments, and food assistance. And there are multiple different local nonprofits that are assisting us with distributing these funds to residents in Santa Fe. So this is very good progress that we've made so far. We'll be submitting our first reimbursement request to DFA this week. We've been hard at work to make sure, meeting with DFA and meeting with our city departments to make sure we have all the right documents in order. The first request will be about $5 million this week, and then we look forward to making the second request next week for the remaining $1.5 million that has already been spent. So again, very good progress. We have all hands on deck from the initial eligibility approvals by our legal department to the procurement, making sure we're following our procurement rules by our procurement and purchasing division, and then all the way through actually making those payments out the door. So we're very happy to report the progress that we've made in the last few months of this. The balance is about $5.5 million that we're working towards encumbering. I have several requests for POs and contracts in my queue that I'm reviewing and that we reviewed with DFA to ensure the eligibility requirements are met from the CARES Act, from the Treasury guidance that has been issued. In addition to that, we will be submitting reimbursement requests for prior period expenses as well, PPE, personnel expenses that we have incurred going back to the spring. So again, all hands on deck to get these dollars out into our community and to ensure that we are being diligent about the projects that we are approving to maximize the reimbursements that we will be getting from DFA. But we do plan to seek reimbursement for the full $17.5 million, and we have communicated that to DFA as well.
Okay, great. Questions for Ms. McCoy on that? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Just a clarification, I was trying to jot the numbers down. You just said, what was the 6.5 million? You said that has been, what again?
It's already been paid out.
Paid
So
out.
either payroll expenses or invoices for services or goods that has already been paid out.
Got it.
That's a
And
little
then-
under 40% of what of our total allocation.
Okay, and then the 1.5 million you said had been spent, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. So of that 6.5 million, 5 million we're going to be submitting for a reimbursement request this week to DFA. That'll be our first reimbursement request. We met with them today to, again, cross all our T's, dot all our I's to make sure we had everything in order, so it will be approved. And then next week, we plan to submit for reimbursement the remaining 1.5 million that has already been, of the 6.5 million that has already been expended.
Okay, just.
And that number potentially will be higher. We're asking departments to update us on a weekly basis with this information. So we're making sure that we're staying on track in this month of December to submit our reimbursement request to DFA.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, anything else from the committee?
Mr. Chair, I'm just curious, so we've got about 40% spent. How are you feeling about getting it all spent and, realizing that the window is closing and, probably took some time to get the systems up and just curious.
Yeah, I think I'm very encouraged because the number that we actually have encumbered is closer to 70%, and we have about 4 weeks left. And again, the remainder, that 5.5 million that's remaining, 12 million's already been encumbered. The 5.5 million remaining will be a mix of expenditures that we'll have going forward, at these new projects that you've heard so much about and that you approved, and then submitting reimbursement requests for, again, some of those expenses going back to the spring that are eligible. Again, that is our primary focus, to ensure that what we are submitting for reimbursement, we get reimbursed for every single dollar of that 17.5 million that was awarded. And then looking forward ahead to next year, when we're in the middle of our audit proceedings and in the middle of our audit, that everything again checks all of the eligibility requirements, followed all of our procurement rules, and followed all of our accounting policies and procedures as it is being paid out as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, anything else, Ms. McCoy?
That's all for tonight. Thank you all.
Okay, matters from the committee. Okay, matters from the chair. Our next meeting is January 4th, 2021. So I guess we'll have updates, anything financial related, either via email in December or at council meetings, right, Ms. McCoy?
Yes, we will be providing a more in-depth GRT update on September GRT. We did give you the highlights in the financial report, but Brad will continue to present the monthly updates written updates on GRT. Okay,
great. Okay, well then with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Hi, Oliver.
You say bye? Bye,
Bye, Oliver.
bye.
Bye, Oliver.